Starting off at number 10 now, we have Leave. This one comes from a Reddit user who owes his life to a stranger or some supernatural force. See what you guys think. They say, I was stationed in Seoul, South Korea several years ago. I was taking a shower in my room, and when I got out, the word leave was written in small letters in the fog on the bathroom mirror. I don't have a roommate because we get our own private rooms there. A little freaked out, I decided to do exactly that. I left. I went off for some Korean barbecue and wandered the city a bit. I came back a couple of hours later to find the barracks were evacuated and half burnt to the ground. The fire was pinpointed to faulty electrical wiring that caught some insulation on fire inside the walls. Someone or something knew that was going to happen, and to this day, whatever that something was, it didn't want me in the middle of it. I gladly thank who or whatever it is if they give me the chance, but it's been years and I still have no idea.
At number 9 we have The Stalker. This next story was told by a young boy who grew up in a very old house. He said strange creaking noises coming from all over the home at any time of night was very common, but what wasn't common was something called the stalker. Every now and again he would see something out of the corner of his eye. He wouldn't think that it was anything and he would just go on about his business. That was until he saw it. It was something he called the stalker. He said it looked like the girl from The Ring, but it was on all fours. When he looked at it, the stalker just stayed in one spot for what felt like an eternity. The ghost was locked in one spot until it scampered into another room. He told his parents about it, but he brushed it off and said it was a dream. However, our writer was certain that it happened because he went to investigate the spot where the stalker was, and there were 2 wet handprints on the floor. At number 8 we have a short one. Some of my favorite ghost stories are the short ones. It's impressive what you can do with a few sentences. This one goes like this. I woke to the baby monitor crackling with a voice comforting my firstborn. As I adjusted to my new position, my arm brushed my wife sleeping next to me. Ooh, that is creepy. Coming in at number 7 we have imaginary friends. You would be surprised how many kids have imaginary friends that end up being ghosts. In fact, I did a multi-part series on Most Amazing Top 10 all about this. One of the most horrific stories I read about this was a young boy and girl used to have the same imaginary friend. It was just a voice that they would hear. It kept telling them to go into the woods behind their home. They would just ignore it and they really didn't think much of it. In fact, they didn't even know that the other sibling was hearing the voice until they brought it up with each other years later. The scariest part about this was when their younger sister, who was just old enough to talk, started saying that she could hear a voice that told her to go play outside in the trees. Ho ho. Coming in at number 6 we have glowing eyes. A girl was walking home late one night and she can feel something is off. She's not sure what it could be, but she knows she doesn't feel safe. She looks back over her shoulder and she sees a tall man in a trench coat who seems to be swaying side to side as he walks towards her. He's about 30 feet away and she can't make out his face except for a massive grin. This is obviously extremely frightening, so this young lady starts to move quickly, but it seems no matter how fast she moves, he keeps gaining on her. Eventually, she starts running and she can hear laughter start to come from behind her. She's now sprinting and looks back over her shoulder to see how close this man is, and the last thing she sees is the man right behind her with his massive eyes that are glowing red. Coming in at number 5 we have grave robbers. This is a pretty famous story about 2 young boys who wanted to give a scare to their friends. Now, is this story true or is it just an urban legend? It's hard to tell. Apparently there were 2 kids who loved to play pranks on people. One day they decided they wanted to play the ultimate prank by digging up a dead body and scaring their friends with it. So they went to the local graveyard in the middle of the night and they started digging. When they finally worked their way down to the body, they started cheering in excitement. The people living nearby heard the noises and they thought that the dead were rising from their graves. They ran and attacked the 2 boys, mistaking them for zombies. They were both killed and now their ghosts haunt the graveyard. Coming at number 4 we have voodoo priestesses of New Orleans. New Orleans has a long history of voodoo, and apparently there are people who live out in the bayou who have found a way to communicate with the dead. They will talk to the spirits of the dead who have been left to walk the earth without anyone to listen to them. Because these voodoo practitioners have spent the time learning how to talk to spirits, they can command power over them. They can use the dark magic of the dead to cast spells on people, bringing them misfortune. That really sounds like it sucks. Coming at number 3 we have another short one. Alright, we have room for one more short scary ghost story before I hit you with the top 2. I think this one might be my favorite short ghost story of all time, and it goes like this. My daughter won't stop crying and screaming in the middle of the night. I visit her grave and ask her to stop, but it doesn't help. Oh, that gives me goosebumps. Coming in at number 2, we have My Friend in the Basement. A young girl who is about 5 years old moves into a new home with her mom. The two of them love the place, but the mother notices something strange about her daughter. She spends a lot of time in the basement, talking and laughing like there's someone there. Sometimes she'll walk down to check on her to see who she's talking to, and every time there's no one there. One day her daughter comes back upstairs with a bite mark on her arm, and her daughter says, "Richard bit me." Her mom tells her that she is not allowed to play in the basement anymore. Then that night something attacks her daughter in her bed. The mother rushes in the room when she hears the poor daughter screaming. When she finds her daughter, she's still alive, but she has scratch marks all over her body. The next morning the two of them leave the home, never to return. And at the number 1 spot we have the taps. Something that ghosts love to do is turn on the taps and jack up your water bill. If you go online and search for this, you will find countless stories of ghosts who love to mess around with the water. This one was pulled off of Reddit, and it was about a young girl who was living alone, and she was often woken up by the sounds of running water. At first she thought that maybe she forgot to turn off the taps, but it started happening so frequently that she assumed that she was sleepwalking. But then it started happening when she wasn't home. Terrified that someone was breaking into her house when she wasn't there, she called the police. They came to check out the place, but they couldn't find anything. So her next best move was to set up cameras and spend the night at a friend's house. Then she saw it, the taps in the home turning on by themselves. Now it's time to go down the spiritual route and have someone come in and fix the ghost problem. A medium came through to contact the ghost, and it turns out there was a body of a girl who had been drowned in a tub that was in the home, who had been buried under the house. That is spooky.
Alright, at number 10 we have a mass hallucination. This one was posted by a nurse that goes by RN_waitress on Reddit. During a 2012 outbreak of fungal meningitis, the acute care floor she was working on had at least 10 to 15 meningitis patients. The floor itself has a capacity of 20. Many of these meningitis patients were having the same hallucinations. The nurse wrote on Reddit that they experienced children in the corners of their rooms and auditory hallucinations of religious music. Now, if you think this was a prank being played by sick patients, then think again. All of the patients were in isolation with no shared rooms and no communication between one another. So what do you think caused it? Specific parts of the brain the fungal infection was affecting, or was it something else?
Moving on to number 9 now, we have The Figure. When you're a kid and you get creeped out at night, your parents may tell you it's just your imagination. But what if you found out that you were right the whole time? Reddit user Miss Awesomeness said, "When I was a kid between 8 or 9, I used to wake up every night to headlights coming through my bedroom window. The lights would then stop and turn off, not as if a car drove by, but as if they were turned off. Then the long shadows of a man, as if he were looking through my window, would pass by and stop right in front of the window. I would lay really still and pretend nothing happened, every night for months. Eventually I convinced myself it was my imagination. Now that I think back, it stopped when my stepdad moved in, but I was convinced it wasn't real. Across the street lived my best friend, whose mom was also single, and she refused to sleep in her bedroom. Her window faced my window. She told me years later it was because every night a man would park on her side yard and walk over to my yard. The long shadows were from the light in her yard. She eventually decided it was my dad checking in on us and never told me until I was a teenager. It wasn't my dad, I know that because I asked him, so I thought I was crazy and hallucinating for years, or perhaps I wasn't and two kids were having odd dreams at the same time every night." Coming out number 8 now, we have The Room. This one comes from a Reddit user who said, "I work in hospice. I spend a lot of time around dying people. About a month and a half ago, one of my longer term clients was actively passing. Now that can involve hallucinating, seeing and talking to people who aren't actually there. It happens a lot. There's nothing wrong with it. It's the dying person's brain trying to grasp with their new reality. So I work overnights. My client was wide awake, talking to people who were in the room with her but who weren't in the room with me, which was fine. I'm okay with that. Until she started describing people I knew who had passed. I almost quit my job that night and told myself I wouldn't return to her. Most of the rest of her hospice care team started quitting in the next few days, and I ended up staying with her until the very end. That one weird night was the only time she was talking to my dead family members. I'm still kind of messed up over it. Next up, number 7 now, we have the creature. Do you guys believe in Bigfoot? We've talked about that a lot in urban legend videos. Is this story related to that? Reddit user The Glitter Band said, I get insomnia. It was one of those nights and I was sitting out on my back porch at about 4 AM smoking a cigarette. It was one of these eerie nights where there is absolutely no breeze and it's just completely quiet out. We have woods behind our house, and as I was sitting there, I see this person making his way through the canopy of the trees, like jumping from tree to tree, 30 or 40 feet up in the air. I was absolutely stunned and just sat there, dumbly too afraid and confused to even get up and run inside the house. This person or thing or whatever it was stopped directly behind my house and looked at me. At this point it's about 50 feet away and maybe 40 feet up in the air. It pauses for about 5 seconds staring in my direction. I'm absolutely certain that it wasn't an animal. Its body was human shaped and it definitely wasn't a raccoon, bear or any of the other things people might have suggested it was. But the way it was moving through the trees definitely was not human. No human, I don't care how fit they are, could move like that. It was too dark to make out that much detail of the face, clothing or anything like that. After about 5 seconds of looking at me, it turns away and takes off the same way it had been going before, just leaping from tree to tree at a fast pace. Within a few more seconds, it was out of sight. Moving on to number 6 now, we have true or false. This one comes from Reddit user The Ambush Bug. I'm going to jump right into it and we'll discuss it after. They said, in 4th or 5th grade, we stopped all of our classes for the day. 2 people came into our classroom, a man and a woman, and they didn't say why they were there or where they had come from. They handed out questionnaire booklets that seemed like standardized tests, except for the questions within them. 50 or so questions, all of them true or false format, but with really weird content. Some that I can remember were true or false, worms talk to trucks, and true or false, apples are blue. We all answered them while looking really confused, and our teachers were silent the entire time. The next day, nobody said a word about the test. I remember asking people what they were, but nobody could recall where the people were from. We never saw them again, and no faculty of the school ever once mentioned a test. We didn't have them the next year and had never had them before. I still have no clue what they wanted from us. Alright, what is going on there, guys? That sounds like something out of a movie. Like some sort of creepy CIA stuff. Moving on to number 5 now, we have teleportation. Do you guys believe that teleportation can happen? This story makes it sound like you just have to believe really hard to make it happen. Reddit user Evangelina1021 said, I always remember this and do not have an explanation for it. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, I remember waking up in the middle of the night and walking to the stairs. I remember closing my eyes for a second at the top of the stairs, and when I opened them, I would be at the bottom of the stairs. I would run upstairs and close my eyes and the same thing would happen again. It happened at least 4 or 5 times until my parents called me to go to bed because they could hear me run up the stairs. It's weird because I was totally wide awake and do not have a history with sleepwalking. I still think about it and wonder how that was possible. Next up at number 4 now, we have the boats. This one comes from Reddit user Risa, and if you can solve this mystery, guys, there's a massive monetary reward for you at the end of it. I'm serious, you're about to see why. They said, my uncle never had a chance to meet him, hired a small yacht with a small group of friends and were going to use it to do sailing holidays as a business. Anyway, they radioed in very early one morning saying they were out of petrol off the coast and were told they would receive petrol in the morning. They went to deliver petrol and never found the boat. They have only ever found one life donut ring and that's it. They think the boat was pirated, and we have reports that they're still alive in different countries, but they've never been substantiated. They also have a sneaking suspicion that the yacht owner had something to do with it, as he acted so dodgy after it all went down. They literally have absolutely no idea what happened. There were no other ships in the area at the time. They thought they could have been run over and sank by a larger ship. Anyway, it's called the Patanela. There is still a huge reward out for any info. Coming in number 3 now, we have pizza time. This one comes from Reddit user Math the username, who said, I was 18 and my brother Chris was 16. I also have a brother James who was 5 at the time. We had just moved into an older house that used to be 3 apartments. We just about finished unpacking and we designated rooms. James's room was directly above the living room with a staircase. James went up to discover his new room and Chris and I took a short walk around the neighborhood. We got back and were sitting in the living room just talking. My mom says she's going to get pizza for dinner and leaves. She took a fairly long time, which is normal for her. I think she really enjoys the small breaks she gets when she can leave the house without James, and I never object to babysitting. Besides, James is plenty occupied with his new room. Chris and I are just talking in the living room. James is super excited about his new room. We hear him running and stomping around upstairs, opening and closing doors. Sometimes he slams the doors pretty hard, but whatever, he's a kid. I assumed he fell asleep since the noise stopped eventually. I hear my mom's car pull up. I get up to meet her in the kitchen. My mom comes in carrying soda. James follows directly behind her carrying the food, yelling pizza time. She took him with her to get dinner. Chris and I just looked at each other, taking way too long to comprehend what was happening and what was making that noise upstairs. Next up at number 2 now, we have John. This one is just straight up creepy. If they are telling the truth about the details of this story, then I have no idea what the explanation is. Reddit user CatGib13 said, when my son was about 2 or 3, he wouldn't go to sleep, so I let him in my bed. My husband was asleep, so I told my boy he had to look at his books quietly when I read mine. He was good for a bit, but then he started reading the book, actually reading the words out loud, slowly. Now he couldn't read, and it was never a book we had read to him yet. It wasn't memorization. I asked him how he knew what it said, and he replied, my friend John is telling me. He talked to John whenever he played. He divided his Matchbox cars into 2 piles and talked to his friend. He also claimed he lived in his nursery closet. At age 4, we moved him into his big boy room, and now that he's 16, he refuses to even step into the nursery. He hasn't been in there since we moved him out. When I ask why, he says he doesn't know, but it gives him the creeps and the hairs on his arm stand up even thinking about it. That doesn't bother anyone else. I don't actually know what the explanation for that story is. Maybe the kid could read better than they thought, or maybe the spirit of a dead man called John was reading out loud to him at night. I hope it's the first one. And finally, number 1 now, we have Ernie. Do any of you guys have those toys that talk when you press a button on them or move in front of them? Did you ever think they could be creepy? Well, you're about to, after this story from Reddit user LXNXB. They said, when I was a kid, I had lots and lots of plushies. One of them was a talking Ernie doll from Sesame Street that wasn't functioning properly. You had to absolutely bang it on a table for it to say, I feel great. Our old house in my home country was housed with spirits, but not bad ones, or at least that's what my parents said. I never witnessed or felt anything until this one time. When I was 8, I overheard my parents saying something along the lines that my Ernie plushie spoke every time they talked about my grandma. I got irrationally scared, which made my parents hide Ernie in a huge box along with my other unused plushies. One time, when I was playing hide and seek, I was hiding with my childhood friend Jay in our spare room where the box of plushies were. While we were hiding, I figured I might as well tell him the story about the haunted Ernie doll and my just recently passed away grandma. In the middle of the story, we hear Ernie say, I feel great, in the box on top of the shelf. There's no way that was moved, and even if it was somehow moved by gravity, you need to bang Ernie on the table to even make it talk. We screamed and ran outside.
Coming in at number 10, we have the Heart Feaster. This is one thing that I will never want in my life, and I am pretty confident that it will never happen to me, and that is sleep paralysis. Being stuck in a state where you can't move as you hallucinate in the dark sounds like something so villainous even Freddy Krueger wouldn't do it. He'd be like, at least kill them after, don't just let them sit there all night, that's gross. Luckily I sleep like a log, so there's no chance anything like that is going to happen to me, but for some others this can happen quite often. When people are stuck in sleep paralysis, it can be something as simple as having the feeling that someone is watching you as you're sleeping, while other people will have the Heart Feaster. A story online talked about a horrible entity that would come visit someone as they slept. They named this beast the Heart Feaster because it would lurk into the room when they couldn't move move, and then it would crawl on top of them. The creature looked like its body was made out of a dark crimson, and it had long fingers that were almost like claws. Its face resembled a demon with a long pointed nose and jagged teeth. While this person was stuck and unable to move, the heart feaster would reach its long piercing fingers into their chest and pull out their heart and start eating it in front of them. Wow.
Coming in at number 9 is the bloodbath. Now this one is gruesome and shared by a user called Paravel. So they shared that they were working their regular night shift in a bone marrow transplant unit with another nurse. They had 5 patients, and as the other nurse was coming out of room 4, she shared that the patient in there had died a very gruesome death. He was sedated and approved to go home, but that same night, the nurses heard the sound of someone falling. They went in to check on him and saw nothing but blood. The man had pulled out his own central line, and there was blood everywhere, like it was a bloodbath, Game of Thrones, a red wedding style. He died right there and then, and no one knew why he did it. He was literally free to go. But get this, a few weeks later, a little old lady gets moved into that same room, and she asks if anyone had died in there. The nurse brushed it off, saying people die in the hospital all the time, but the old lady replied by saying, no, I think a young guy died in here because he's talking to me right now. Now this woman also has a central line, and later that night, the nurse goes in to check on her. Again, an utter bloodbath. Her central line had been cut. Not pulled like the other guy, it was proper cut. There was no scissors in the room, and all the lady said was he did it. Right, enough of that.
Next at number 8, we have false hope. This one comes from an ER nurse who spoke from a now deleted account on Reddit. She had an old lady stay in the ER overnight that was near death. They saw the signs: irregular breath, barely responsive, pale and cool, so they turned the lights down and kept an eye on her monitor. They searched and couldn't find any family, and then on top of that, she was a DNR, do not resuscitate. So the writer says they were basically waiting for her to die. She was close. And then, an hour later, all of a sudden, she's standing at the door of her room with all of her clothes back on, just there. Apparently, she was hungry, so they got her food, and while she ate, the old woman talked to the staff a little bit in her room, but then she told her nurse she was tired and wanted to lie back down. Within 30 minutes, she was dead. This surge of energy is called rallying before death, and it's not uncommon, but it's super unnerving, just like this Redditor said, and it's just unnerving to see so much life in a person before death. Scary.
Now at number 7 is Speak Back to Me. Now this story comes from a travel nurse called Courtney, and if you don't know what a travel nurse is, it's basically a nurse that travels across the country and works at a new hospital every 13 weeks. Now Courtney shared that she was working at an ICU at the time, and she had a patient there that would only repeat what was said to her and say nothing else. Now that day Courtney was with her all night, and she started telling her all the ways she had apparently died, saying things like, I died because I took too much insulin, I died because of narcotic overdose, I died on a sunny Sunday afternoon, and so on. Now Courtney kind of brushed it all off as the patient was troubled, but then she looked up at the ceiling and said they're all still here. At that point Courtney was like, I'm gonna up the hell out of here, and ran out of the room. If that was me, I'd be like, medicate honey, I'm not here to be hearing you talk about the ghosts of death's past, I'm here to do my job and then leave. She further shared that once she was caring for a blind patient who continuously asked her what time it was all night. She left and came back a while later to check in on her, and all the patient said was it's the witching hour. Court looked at the time, saw it was 3:33 AM and walked out, and hopefully never returned, because I sure damn would have not.
Alright, on to number 6, A Shriek and a Goat Man. Now, this isn't the shrieking goat like that Taylor Swift cover. This is a story that comes from the mother of Danger Moose, or Danger MUUS, on Reddit. She was on night shift, the mother, in a hospital in Arizona going room to room when an old lady told her about a goat man trying to get through the doors. This woman was an insomniac, so the mother didn't think anything of it. Then, a blood-curdling shriek rang out that people heard all around the hospital. People were freaked out, and then a few looked out the windows where they found hoof marks by the doors and windows, with no trails leading to or from them. That insomniac clearly knew something was up, and it must have been the goat man causing that shriek, right? Either himself or through nefarious means?
Filling our number 5 slot is the Hallucination. Now this one's from Reddit user Whites42, who worked as an ICU nurse. She shared that a woman in her 20s had come in with serious cardiac abnormalities and then abruptly went into respiratory distress. She was put on a ventilator and was sedated just enough to keep her lucid. She could nod to answer questions, and that's all they really needed from her at the time. Now a few nights later, the patient in the room next to her has died, but the body was yet to be taken to the morgue. Now the girl's room door was closed, and the male patient's curtain was drawn, so they never met nor did they see each other. The nurse went to check in on the woman and she looked like she was about to die, like she was in pure panic mode, and the nurse asked her if she was cold, were you in pain, are you warm, and she said no to everything. She then asked if she saw something and she started nodding aggressively. And mind you, just because she was sedated, that doesn't mean she was hallucinating, like she wasn't. She started probing and asking questions to try and figure out what she was seeing, and she found out that the patient was seeing a Caucasian bald man missing his left arm. The nurse then freaked out when she realized the patient was seeing the ghost of the man who had died in the room next to her without ever actually seeing him. Okay.
At number 4, followed by death. This comes from another deleted account on Reddit. A staff member at a skilled nursing facility was typically working in the Alzheimer's ward and had a troubling string of experiences. First, they heard someone shuffle behind them, and then they feel someone put a hand on their shoulder while they're in a linen closet. So when they turn around, they see no one there and the door is still closed, so it was a bit freaky. Then another lady began to complain to them for 2 weeks straight every night that a man was coming into her room at night. That being in the Alzheimer's ward, the author of this post didn't take it too seriously, saying they'd check in on her throughout the night. At the end of the 2 weeks of complaining, the staff member asked what the man looked like, just out of curiosity. The woman said, "He's real handsome and wears a black suit. Oh, he's right behind you now, honey," which justifiably freaked the writer of this story out. There was no one behind them, and as for the old lady, she died the next night in her sleep. So was the person in the suit death following them? Is that what they felt with their hand on the shoulder on the hand? I leave it to you.
At number 3 is the Grim Reaper. Now this one's from Redditor Scary Kerry 91476, and boy, oh boy, are you guys not ready for this one. So Kerry is an intensive care nurse, and she shared that back in 1999, she was in a 12-bedded ITU in London. She was in charge of the nurses station, and she looked up to see a man coming through the double doors of the unit. And that image just stuck in her mind even 20 years later. It was like he had been plucked out of 1974 and dropped into 1999. He was wearing cord pants, a check shirt with a patterned tank top on top, and platform shoes. He looked about 30 years old, and he just very calmly walked towards the bay of patients. Now Kerry had no idea who he was, so she asked him, and he responded by nodding and then just continued walking. Alright then. He went and stopped at the end of a patient's bed and just looked at them. He didn't touch them, there was no contact, he just made eye contact. The patient was sick but very stable, but as the man was looking at them, they suddenly started deteriorating in front of Kerry's eyes. Staff rushed over to assist him, and they were just acting like the man wasn't even there. And with that being said, he exited as calmly as he had come in. The patient ended up dying, and Kerry asked the assisting staff who the man was, and none of them had even seen him or remembered any man even walking in that day. So Kerry thoroughly believed that she saw the Grim Reaper at work that day. And Kerry, I bloody agree with you.
At number 2, we have a C-section nightmare. It comes from P as in Peter on Reddit, who had a traumatizing experience while getting a C-section. She said that when the doctors were preparing to close her, she had blood splash on her face. Her own blood. She wrote that one of the doctors working on her must have dropped one of her organs. Like, hello? This woman was simultaneously giving life and being reminded that hers is fragile. She at least had a good attitude about it, because she said her family got their money's worth from the anesthesiologist who wiped the blood from her face and glasses. But that's an organ falling and splash. I don't know how they are not super traumatized by this, but that's the miracle of life, ladies and gentlemen.
And last but not least, at our number 1 spot is the repetition. Now this one's from Redditor Cam Brewer, who was a 4th year nursing student when this happened to them. She was sitting for a 28-year-old woman who was going through alcohol withdrawal, and it was the 3rd day, which is scientifically the worst. And sitting is basically when you sit by a patient that could be dangerous to themselves or others, and this woman was fully restrained, like hands and feet were bound to the bed. She was shouting racial slurs at the nurse and spitting on her, and after a while started straight up hallucinating. She thought she was in her car driving with her 2 kids in the back, and she kept begging the nurse to take the wheel. She then explained the car crash in vivid detail, saying that her son had died. She kept crying and apologizing and repeatedly kept asking the nurse to hand her the body of her dead son. She was sedated, and when that wore off, the same hallucinations happened again. The same scenario happened 8 times in this woman's 12-hour shift, and after hearing it enough times, she realized it wasn't a hallucination hallucination at all. This was something that she had actually done but was replaying in her mind in her delirious state. Can you imagine being so delirious that like you're hallucinating a car crash where you killed your 7-year-old son, but it's not hallucination, it's real? Nope.